Springtime is here. Passover 2025 is around the horizon, and I've decided to create a Haggadah for Passover and to lead my family Seder. I might be regretting this decision. I'm starting to feel like this is a lot to bite into, but I wanted to document the process right now. So let's go back to the beginning. Let me take you through the problem and why did I think that I need to do this? What kind of started me on this journey? This is the message thread from my family. This is the dates, and this is for the planning of our upcoming trip to Europe for Passover, a tradition that goes back a long time. And most of this was really focused on travel and getting the whole family from all the corners of the world together and all that. Until recently, a few days ago, my dad, who's got more times on his hands than most of us, said, "Does anybody have Haggadot? I think we abandoned the old ones in Florida last year. Perhaps we should print out a few pages, highlights, and multiple copies." And then he also talks about matzahs, but that's a different story. And I was thinking about piping in or not. We do have a bunch of old Haggadahs at home that actually Sunny bought a few years back when we went over, some cheapos from Amazon. They were like thin booklets. They kind of did the job, and that's what we used last year. But we had some issues last year. So anyway, I was still biding my time. Here, Sunny said, hey, he thinks that I took the Haggadahs. And my dad, of course, is worried about the prices of things. And then he highlights we should have Chinese for Annie. And Annie's my mother-in-law, whose English is not great. And this brings up the first problem that we had, which is linguistics. Like, my brother lives in Israel. His 4 kids, their English is not great. My kids live here. Their Hebrew is virtually non-existent. They have a little bit of Chinese. And my mother-in-law is joining us. And last year, the problem is we had enough Haggadahs, I think, for most of the people, but the pages never matched together. So, like, last year was a rough Seder that we didn't really do the thing. But that started to make me think about that. I was just looking for ways to do it. I said, okay, I'll look for a Chinese one. I actually found really interesting ones from China that date back to when the Jewry was living in Shanghai, but that's a story for another day. My dad found another free printable thing from Chabad in Hebrew, but I was thinking about it. That would not solve our being on the same page problem. And so that's what I said. I have them. The problem I have them, meaning these old Haggadahs that Sunny got. The problem is that no one is on the same page. We need to find a way to keep everyone together. Maybe I'll have my AI translate the version and print that out. And I didn't quite know what I was taking on at the time, but I was starting to think about the idea of last year no one took responsibility. Since my mom passed away, no one is really helming this thing. And maybe it's my time to step up to do that. And I finally started. I've been thinking about it for 10 days or so, and I finally started today. And I realized, okay, I want to conduct it also. And I know it's going to be a futile thing, but I'm going to try to create a Haggadah that is meaningful. I don't know if you noticed the last comment from my dad. Impatient as usual, he says, you can lead the Seder, but there's a limit of 20 minutes before dining. We'll see. 20 minutes is not really enough to do it. Then again, the kids are really young. Last year was our first reunion since my mother's passing, and she was always the glue around these things. We were able to all converge in Florida, which is hard to do. We are 3 siblings. I live in New York. My brother Sonny currently lives in New Orleans, although he has moved around quite a bit. And my dad and my brother Dudu live in Tel Aviv in Israel. So it's always been a struggle, but it's a tradition that dates back at least 20, 25 years. So the fact that we were able to get together through our mourning, and we were in kind of a rough PTSD from losing our mom, but we still were able to get our stuff together, plan this trip in Florida, and have a Seder was a miracle in its own. But the Seder itself was messy. We cobbled together a bunch of books. No one thought about it ahead of time, and I feel like since my mom was the leader of the Seder, no one wanted to step up and take that responsibility. We were, I don't know, trying to be respectful of each other, trying to still feel out the dynamics in the new family without a matriarch. On top of that, the books that we had for leading were totally inadequate. They were just a bunch of different books all cobbled together. And the problem with that is every book has different stuff in it. Not everything is represented in every book. And more importantly, they're not on the same pages, etc. So for people who don't know what they're doing, which is the vast majority and are like barely interested, if you can't even tell them what page we're on to stay on the same page, it was pretty much useless. It wasn't much of a Seder at all. It was a nice meal. That was still the main thing, but it wasn't that great. There was no real Seder happening. For my mom, may she rest in peace, Passover was always a struggle. She grew up with Passover being like the most important holiday. It's a big event. As we were growing up, it was really important for her that we have a proper, quote unquote, proper Seder, that we hit everything on it, that we talked about it, that we did, the mitzvah of just telling the story of Egypt time and time again. But my poor mom, there was no cooperation in the household at all with that desire. My dad had no desire, always dragging his feet, really not interested in any kind of religious ritual whatsoever. And we were growing up kids. We grew up secular. It wasn't particularly interesting to us. Some of the things were outright. I mean, it's a long ritual. It's a long tradition. It just takes forever. And there's one example that I will always remember. My brother Dudu and I, who were close in age, would often kind of make each other burst into fits of laughter. And there is one rabbi that's mentioned of the million rabbis in the Haggadah. His name is Ben Zoma, but it sounds very similar to Ben Zona in Hebrew, and Ben Zona in Hebrew is son of a bitch. And that was like hilarious, especially after like 2 glasses of wine when you're 16. And my poor mom, she's just trying to give us a sense of the tradition and to make us want to enjoy it and to make it matter to us as much as it did to her, or at least a fraction would be enough for her, but it just didn't. Later on in life, as she was trying to get into different streams of more progressive Judaism and stuff like that, she would always cut out and insert little parts that try to be more inclusive, that try to make sense of the Haggadah, that, to help explain or put a different spin on some of the more offensive parts of it. And when the grandkids started to get born, my brother's kids, then she would try to do what I'm doing now. She would try to include play and playful things into the Haggadah to make it more fun, Like it's no secret. It goes back to Babylon, I think, that kids are bored during this thing, and that's why they invented the Afikoman. And I don't think my mom was ever really successful. She was just too earnest and too serious. And, when she tried to, she would buy these plastic locusts one year and she would, throw them during the 10 plagues. It just it just didn't work. It fell on deaf ears. And I'm probably going to see some very similar results myself right now. When I was a little bit older, I remember feeling sympathy for my mom, but also having some real aversions to the Haggadah myself. And we often would have long discussions into the night after the Seder about some of the themes of the Haggadah and why is it so important. She was never able to provide me really with a good answer, I feel like, and the problematic parts of it are numerous. The biggest one that I can think of off the top of my head was Shvo Chamatcha, which is the one about spilling your wrath upon the goyim, upon the non-Jews, and that's, it's an act of vengeance upon what was done to us. And that's just such an ugly sentiment. Revenge is an ugly sentiment in general, let alone this slavery that, happened or didn't happen, whatever is historically questionable. Even if it was true, it happened so long ago. Vengeance on that is just, there is no justification. And then there's the problem with the concept of God, which is an abstraction, which everyone has to deal with on a certain level. But a lot of the story itself, as fantastical of a story as the story of the Exodus is, there's a lot of hocus pocus going on there. There's a lot of God manifesting itself in a way that's actually kind of very un-Jewish, very pagan, very D&D, the plagues and the staff snakes and all those things. And it's like, okay, what are we celebrating exactly? What is the problem exactly? And of course, the ever-present political problem, which I'm not going to delve into too much, but this dichotomy that we find ourselves as Jews, as Israelis, where, the Seder, Passover story, all this really hits home the narrative about the Jewish victimhood. And there is no denying Jewish victimhood throughout the ages. But the fact that the Jewish state is making other people victims now, in many ways. And I'm not going to talk about justification or not justification, but the irony of that it's big. It's really big. And I could never really settle these mixed feelings about everything that it represented. But the tunes are catchy, the music is good, and what I've learned as I became a father, as I helped my wife through the conversion process, when she said she wanted to convert, my strong feeling, what my mom was trying to tell me but never got into my thick skull, was the importance of tradition. That's what kept our people alive for so long. It's those little traditions, those little rituals and symbols, as silly as they might be, and those stories, as universal maybe and unspecific as they are, but we have to claim them, we have to take them on, and we have to keep telling them between the generations, like what it says in the Seder, because we have to remember our Jewish identity, and we have to make sense. We have to make sense to it in a way that works with our own feelings of morality and place in the world. So this is why I decided to take on this project, in memory of my mom, for the sake of my children, for posterity, and to try to make sense. Try to make sense of all these contradicting themes within the Haggadah. Now, as I realized this morning when I started actually executing and producing, this is a huge undertaking. I was talking to my friend Alon yesterday, another Israeli expatriate, godless, secular, who teaches Judaism, and I told him about it, and he said, That's a massive project. Are you sure? And I was like, AI, blah, blah, blah. I'll be fine. Well, it is a pretty big project, and I am really busy. But the deadline, Passover, is in, 2.5 weeks. We're about to travel. So the deadline is motivator, a pusher. Done is better than perfect, which is probably going to be the case over here. And here we go. And if that wasn't enough, I decided to catalog and record and share my process of doing this with the world, with whoever wants to watch. You guys. I've been doing more video blogging recently. I am a filmmaker by trade. It just makes sense, but it's an extra layer of work. So, my apologies if this is rough. It was going to be pretty rough in terms of video making. The main goal here is to create that Haggadah and take you guys along the way. This is my long-winded intro. We're going to jump straight into day by day the thought process of creating that from now on. If you watch this, if you're interested, I thank you. I would love to hear some of your own personal experiences with family around Passover. Isn't that such a universal theme? Until next time.